Hola a todos, sean bienvenidos nuevamente a The BlockCode Series. Esta vez seguimos cubriendo nuestra serie de criptoeconomía hablando de DeFi o Decentralized Finance. Para este episodio en particular tenemos un invitado muy especial, el youtuber DeFiDad, quien es una personalidad que se dedica a realizar tutoriales experimentando con esta tecnología y sus mercados. Vamos a estar hablando precisamente sobre este tema a continuación. Y antes les recomiendo suscribirse al canal, activen la campana de notificaciones para enterarse de nuevos videos cada semana y dejen en los comentarios qué otros temas e invitados les gustaría ver próximamente en el canal. Ahora sí, sin más demora, vamos a ver qué tiene para contarnos DeFiDad.
Well, thank you so much again, DeFiDad. Very excited to finally get going this conversation because I have so many questions for you. Okay.
Excellent.
So
I bet I have a lot of questions for you as well.
let's start with a little bit of lightness because it's going to get heavy, I promise you. Okay. So first off, something very interesting about your approach to the cryptocurrency space is that you present yourself as a dad and a user. This is a rather rare characterization to see from content creators and self-proclaimed educators in the
namely Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we had our firstborn at that time. And so the reason I learned so much was that every night I was putting our son to sleep, and I would sit there, he would fall asleep on me, and I'd be kind of like reading everything from like the Bitcoin white paper to listening to podcasts. And over time I ended up spending many hours. Like I would go in there to put him to sleep, and it should have taken a few minutes, but then I would just sit there and just keep reading and reading and reading. And it was a story I was sharing with other friends a few years later, and they were like, man, that's like a really like relatable way to get to know someone. Just especially if you've had kids, it's something everyone's really aware of, just putting kids to sleep and kind of the time suck that children are and how hard it is to keep learning. And I think to this day, the only reason I've continued to do it is I think it's just a core part of my identity. It's easy to, I would feel really disingenuous to present myself as something else. So I am an Etherean. I am probably more of a silent Bitcoiner now, and definitely a dad. Like that's a huge part of my life. So yeah, it works for one reason or another. It works.
Now, resuming, we were before we started recording, we were actually touching a couple of very interesting things, and I think that one of them is especially important to set the context for this interview. I would like you to please start telling me, how does the finance landscape looks like right now in the United States? How does it look for the regular American right now?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because I think defining what is a regular American has become rather confusing. I'll say this: growing up, I grew up in the Midwest. Definitely, like you could like generically call that the heartland of the United States. And what I recognized as I was getting older, it probably wasn't until college, was how financially illiterate that part of the country was. You have folks who, these are people who normally work maybe the same job their whole lives. And again, this is not a bad thing. This is a privilege in many cases. People are able to put a roof over their heads, save enough money to eventually retire and live off of Social Security. And so as I was growing up, though, I definitely noticed that it was very simple banking tools. You had a checking account, you had a savings account. The checking account might be free, but there was probably more often than not, I knew of those to have fees, which is kind of nuts to me, because here you are lending your money to the bank, and they're lending out, God knows, like 9/10 of the money to other people and making tons of interest off of it. And then savings accounts, which I remember even as a kid, the first time, like my mom thankfully was like, you need to open up a savings account when I was like 18. And I remember seeing the percentage, and she at the time had said, this is so pathetic. Years ago, it was so much higher. And it was maybe like, I don't know, 0.0 something percent. And so when I went to college, I was very fortunate. I had a lot of financial aid that supported me to go to a great university. And when I'm there, I'm like slowly discovering that while I think I lived a great life growing up, and I felt very fortunate for that, sort of childhood, I'm realizing there is a tremendous amount of wealth that I was totally ignorant to. These are people worth not just millions, but in some cases there were, people worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And this was kind of open because you knew that their parents were famous and this and that. And so, yeah, I think that now that leads me going back to your question. I think that childhood that I lived, I'm not quite sure how possible that is. Like, I don't know if my parents making the middle-class income they made, I don't know if we would be living the same way, because rents have gone up so much and it's become harder for anyone to buy property, which, God knows, like, if anyone's ever compared renting to owning property, that tends to be one of the keys to like really living like a more prosperous life, is owning a piece of property. What I've noticed over the last 4 years is that I've noticed, there's a saying that the stock market is not the economy and the economy is not the stock market. And so there's been a ton of focus in the United States, at least, on the fact that the stock market has really trended upwards for the most part. I mean, it's been in like a 11-year bull market or something like that, but it's also gone up a lot in the last 4 years. Even with this pandemic, I mean, it's recovered a lot. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, I think about a good friend of mine, his mother works at a Walgreens and she's working like 12 plus hours a day. She's 60 years old. She's obviously very susceptible to getting COVID-19. She's coming into contact with all these folks. And I'm thinking to myself, what is the matter with us? Like, this is just not, this is not taking care of one another. So anyway, I think to sum it up, I think we're not doing that well in the United States even. I think the average American is really hurting. Like, these are the folks that really, I don't think have benefited from this economy. They've just kind of like observed that the stock market keeps going up. So
what you describe, at least when you go to college, it describes like you got hit by the knowledge that actually finance moves beyond measuring that you have never seen before, and it's actually something that happens to a lot of people. So that's a very interesting setting. Thank you for explaining it, because that comes with a second question. You said that you have said in previous interviews that you actually came closer to cryptocurrencies after you had your first child, and something that it came during our conversation pre-recording was precisely about parenthood and finance. I would like you to tell me how those solutions with cryptocurrencies have impacted your views on your current financial life.
Yeah, it's been a radical 3 years. I've been in this space, I think, almost exactly 3 years, and I think there's a few like key lessons that like stick in my mind. One of them was the idea that I'd always heard about compound interest, and it's like I understood it, but I like really didn't understand it. I would say that I understood, oh, there's the power of compounding interest, and that's why people need to save over a lifetime, and the sooner you start saving, the better, because it compounds longer and turns into more money. However, when you're using DeFi in particular, you're privileged to understand every mechanism that is driving these DeFi applications. And so like a really simple example is I have, over the last 3 years, I mean, I've clearly come to recognize that it is valuable to be able to risk putting your capital into something that will pay you a return, and that to let your money sit, to let like cash sit there because of inflation, it does you no good. And even throw out the inflation, like if if you're using a US dollar, you're in a pretty sound fiat currency, even on its worst day. The fact is that once you discover, for myself, once I discovered, hey, I can earn 5% interest, maybe lending to compound, or on other days, if I'm using curve finance, I've earned as much as 30 to 50% annualized percentage yield. So you're sitting there saying, why would I ever put my money back into a bank that's paying me 0.01%, and they're charging me fees that actually outweigh that tiny percentage that you're even earning. So there's been that, the ability to let your money earn money. I think also just like, I was always someone who like calculated down to the penny what I would be spending in a month. And I would say most of my life before, maybe like 5 years ago, it was like every single dollar was literally spent by the end of the month. It was, I was paying off like student loans and just really struggling to save anything more. Now I think I've come to realize that, you know, being able to understand again where that money can earn me more money and continually learn and then babysit those investments to a certain extent. You know, just make sure that like when I'm using DeFi applications, these are really new. You know, there could be a smart contract bug. Is the team, you know, continually working to improve the application and the code? Those are things that are really important to me. So yeah, it's been a matter of becoming like a student of finance. And again, I think that's a byproduct of being in this space. You know, people are very interested in like, how does money work? How does lending and borrowing? Most people, if you ask them, what happens when you put your money in a savings account? Most people don't know what happens. They just know that they get some interest. At the end of the day, when you realize that people are paying, you know, who knows, like let's say 5-6% interest, the bank is recouping that because they're providing a service and they have overhead and employees. So I'm not demonizing them, but what happens when you can automate all of those banking services and cut out all the middlemen, all the overhead? Well, holy cow. Now the person paying interest pays less, and the person lending is earning that much more. So I think that's it's a pretty long-winded way of saying I've really become a student of how does money work, how does finance work. You know, once you understand a number of these concepts, they're like Legos, and they sort of stack on top of one another.
No, actually, that's a very great answer because it also kind of covers what will be the first defining answer of the interview, which will be what is DeFi. Could you clarify this concept that keeps appearing, and the more it appears, more vague it sounds? What is DeFi?
Yeah, so this answer really depends on who you're talking with. And so maybe Diana, who should we think about this as someone who's already in the crypto space, who maybe has like some Bitcoin, or should we be talking about someone who is maybe they know the name Bitcoin, but they have no idea what Ethereum
outside of the crypto community? Yes, let's start with outside of the crypto community, and maybe you could start by telling me why is there a difference? On the answer.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, first off, I think the difference is, so when you're trying to get someone to buy into a new idea, I think that's very difficult. And it all starts with like, again, who are we actually talking with? Otherwise, we're showing up and vomiting words and, you know, thinking that there is some magical set of sentences that's going to like convert someone from I don't really care about this to I really care about it. I think end of day, people buy into ideas when they talk with someone who they can resonate with, or they see themselves in what's being communicated and the value that they might derive from using a product or service. So when I think about someone who has zero experience with crypto, one really easy way to like tie it together is So decentralized finance is very similar to what email did to the mail service. It is essentially creating, I don't even like this word. I use this word a lot, and it's probably not a good word for a total newbie, but it's creating peer-to-peer money applications. And all that means is that you live in a world today where your money acts a lot like what the postage service was, 20, 30 years ago. You could only send communications by paper. You had to go to the post office, and you had to, you can only send it during certain hours. Your money is very similar to that, except people just for some reason have looked past this. You have your money in a bank, and if you're fortunate enough and you live in a country where regulations protect you, sometimes you have applications where you can send money to one another, but that money doesn't settle until the banks come to an agreement there. And that normally can take several days. And so anyways, going back to decentralized finance, to me is about empowering your money. As long as you have an internet connection, you don't require any sort of KYC, or basically a sign up that requires you submit lots of private information, where you live, what your name is, in the United States, what your social security number is. There's no minimum, there's no geo restriction. And so when you think about a new finance system that, again, only requires the internet connection, gets rid of these minimums and KYC and sign up, suddenly now you have this really powerful new banking system that pays participants better than what we've seen in legacy banking systems. When you lend your money, you earn more. When you borrow, you pay less interest. Anyways, that's tends to be how I think about it for a total newbie. What do you think of that though, Diana? Does that, what parts of that resonates with you, or how do you explain it to someone who's totally new to DeFi or crypto?
I am very lucky to have you to answer those questions. So
hard. It's such a hard question. It sounds, ridiculous. When you spend all this time on it, and you're like, how can it be this hard to explain it? But that's because it always starts with, actually, the better answer to all of that is when someone asks me, hey, what's DeFi? If it's one-on-one and it's not an interview like this, and we're not, trying to address lots of people at once, I'm like, hey, how do you think about money? What do you use? Do you buy stocks? Do you have a savings account? As soon as they say, oh, I have a savings account, cool. So imagine if we got rid of the bank, but the savings account was all automated. And now people that are paying interest, you're getting a higher return. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's basically it. It all lives on your phone. The only thing that's dangerous about this is, this wallet that's on your phone, or maybe you have a hardware wallet, it's just like cash. If you lose it and you don't have some backup for it, that's dangerous. You've now lost your wealth. If I lose $1 on the street, I can't retrieve it. You have to have, you have to really just take care of how you custody these assets.
I wanted to ask you exactly this question, since you're bringing money up, which is very, as I told you, it's a very nice example. DeFi is also defined as smart money. What does smart money actually mean? And a second question, of course, is Ethereum actually the best platform for this smart money?
Yeah, good questions. I think of it as smart money because it is programmable money. I am not a developer, and so I can't talk to the extent of the limitations of smart contracts on Bitcoin. But I keep it simple, and I look around and say, where are all of these applications being released? Where is everyone building? And where are you seeing more and more folks dogpile into wanting to build? And Ethereum really has this incredible lead there. At the same time, it's apples and oranges for me, because I look at Bitcoin and it's a remarkable censorship-resistant store of value and the ability to transfer value. Different than that, all of these different applications, these protocols in Ethereum, they are like building blocks. And so when you create one building block, you can start to stack them and create more interesting applications. I think one of the most obvious examples, when you think about like why is this, it's referred to as composability, the ability to compose, applications. When you think about an application like, let's pretend that I take out a loan in DeFi, and I am of course worried about being liquidated. I want to make sure that I maintain enough collateral so that my loan doesn't get liquidated. And so one of the great ways to be, one of the best ways to stay on top of that is to have notifications. Well, there's a new service that'll be coming out called the Ethereum push notification service. And the way it works is that it would connect to an application and your wallet. My wallet has no sort of personal information attached to it. I have wallets that just, it's a hexadecimal, it's numbers and letters, and that's it. And I own that, and that's all there is to be known about it. The Ethereum push notification service as a money Lego now can be used by other DeFi teams to say, you know what, we're going to use this thing so that people can be notified about new product releases, or in this case, what happens if you're close to being liquidated. We would love to be able to alert our users, but we're not requiring your email. So there's this whole idea of how do you rebuild a lot of the wonders of the internet, but without having to give up personal information, which normally is like an email. And so that to me that's been what's really exciting, is these money Legos, they continue to stack. And I keep thinking that I've like truly witnessed enough innovation that like we could just live off this for several years. But then the next week, there's just that much more coming, because everyone is trying to hack money. They're trying to take what's very powerful constructs in legacy finance, in banking, and they're enabling someone who simply has an Ethereum wallet and an internet connection and some courage to try using that application. Does that help, Diana? Does that help to address the smart money Lego thing? Smart money idea?
Yeah, I think it does, especially when you mentioned courage, because certainly this is not the first time that having courage has to do with experimenting with DeFi, not precisely because DeFi bites, but rather because maybe we're ready to get into hot water here. Recently, there was a breach in a DeFi platform. Everyone knows about it. It was Balancer. And this is only the last of a list of similar breaches that have been around in exchanges and in the cryptocurrency space. But now we're talking about DeFi. So the question at this point isn't if the funds are safe in platforms that are being currently built,
Right.
but rather, what does actually keep people trusting these platforms at risk of losing their funds?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, because I think my absolute worst nightmare is to create a tutorial and to have people putting tons of their money, like a higher percentage, let's say, of someone's net wealth. Let's say someone puts 75% or all of their like digital assets, crypto assets into something because they watched a DeFiDad tutorial. But I failed to say, by the way, there is risk involved here. And so the risk that I think about, like that when we're talking about like, can I trust an application? Most of these risks, you can only mitigate them. You can do everything to protect yourself, but most of them still exist. So the top one that we worry about is a smart contract bug. Funny enough, we haven't had as many of those like lately. A lot of these DeFi, what you were calling a breach, is more of an attack. Someone has found an edge case that they're able to exploit. and it doesn't make it, I'm not like defending it, it doesn't make it any better. Like my worst nightmare is anyone losing money. Like a dollar to, whether it's $1 or it's $1 million, like I don't want anyone to lose money. So first off, there's a smart contract bug that gets mitigated by audits. So we have reputable firms that can audit smart contracts. It's very expensive. I mean, I guess not expensive compared to the amount of money that they could end up losing as an application. But, you think about a lot of these folks they're startups with sometimes less than a few people on a team. And so to put up $50,000 or more is a lot. It might require investors. But anyways, that's very necessary. That gives me a little bit of reason to sleep at night if there's an audit. Another thing is a liquidity crisis, which is a liquidity crisis refers to, let's pretend that you and I are lending our money, we're earning interest. What happens if someone withdraws all of the money as a loan and now our money is actually being lent out? There's an example of you and I, maybe we need our money back, but we're waiting for someone who has a loan that's over collateralized, nothing has gone wrong, but they're holding it. Another thing I worry about is stablecoins. Stablecoins have a dollar peg, or they're pegged to the US dollar. And if any one of those fails, some sort of black swan event, or I don't know, someone holds a team hostage and somehow gains access to those smart contracts and it has an admin key, that's terrifying. Most of the teams that are launching new DeFi applications, they have an admin key because there's a pragmatic strategy behind being able to shut down this application if some major hack is discovered. Like someone is able to exploit the fact that maybe they're able to drain funds from a pool, or they can manipulate the price. We want to make sure that people aren't losing money, and we don't want anyone to be learning about an application and just hear about all the great parts of it. The upside. Oh, I can earn 30%. Awesome. Why would I not put my life savings in it? I can earn 30% this year. Well, if you put all your money into it, what happens if the application fails? Well, even if it's Maker, if it's the one of the most respected teams, or if it's Compound, one of the most respected teams, you're risking everything by putting it in there. So yeah, I think that covers all the risks that I think about. And I think one of the strategies that I use personally, and I try to, most of my videos are about like, here's me putting my money into this application and how I'm thinking about why I'm entering it, and also why I might exit this strategy at some point. And yeah, I guess like as I do that, I just, I try to think about communicating that risk so that I think like a really simple lesson from this and all of this risk that I'm considering is, if one of these applications failed, let's hope just one, God, if multiple failed at once, I mean, that would be disastrous. But if one of them failed, would I be able to move on with my life? Would I be able to, overcome the tragedy of losing X amount of money in this? And if the answer is no, I would be devastated. I would be ruined. My life it would be very difficult to move on. Then I think that's a signal that I've put too much money into an application. I want to clarify the fact that all my videos are me using my own money. I am truly using most of these applications, or at least I'm trying them once. I really don't have like this slush fund of money. There are a lot of people in the crypto space who have slush funds of money. And I mean, there are a lot of wealthy people. You start out wealthy, it's a lot easier to take risk and to put that money to use, I think. Like it's 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. $10,000 to some is more than all of their savings combined. But for someone who has $100,000 or $1 million, they can risk quite a bit and not really feel the hurt of it. And hence they have more upside as well. And that's something that I think that's part of, if there's something going back to like the DeFiDad brand, I think there's something relatable to that like, I am not playing with the slush fund. I feel fortunate for where I am in my life, but money means a lot to me. $1 means a lot to me still. It's very valuable.
Well, that makes you a very valuable guest then to speak with.
Yeah.
Because actually, that's one of the biggest maybe trends that you can see when you read about DeFi or you see DeFi tutorials is that precisely those two messages collide. For one side, you have the message that this is for everybody and that everybody can earn with this and you can get rich with it, kind of Bitcoinish kind of conversation. And on
Almost
the
like
other side,
Ponzi-like behavior, I think is what you're describing. When people, I don't like when people say just stack sats, any day of the week. Like, it's like you're telling people no matter what, without having any idea about their background and context, that they should just buy Bitcoin. It's very important to learn from our collective mistakes and not, anyone who, when I talk with someone, if they tell me like, yeah, I'm up 3x in the last year, I'm thinking to myself, you're probably barely up 10% then. Like, that is it's just bullshit to talk to someone like that. Like, why would, it's arrogant, it's off-putting, like, share your wins, that's fine. At the end of the day, like, my goal is to counter the narrative that DeFi is not user-friendly, that crypto is not user-friendly, that there is an inability for anyone to participate unless they already have wealth. I would counter that narrative that I think anyone, again, with any minimal amount of money has the ability to. Of course, again, it takes some courage and a lot of education to get into it. But these applications have just become so much more friendly. They're very dummy proof. A number of the wallets like Argent, Dharma, I just tried the Rainbow wallet the other day. These are really easy wallets to use, with a little bit of education, having the ability to ask questions and not feel stupid for asking those questions. Like, that's really important.
we keep up now with more serious issues. Something that you actually do, you also speak about the DeFi market. Right now, the DeFi market moves well above $1 billion in total value. And something interesting is how this value is distributed in tokens that serve, and correct me if I'm wrong, for different financial purposes. Could DeFi as a whole take advantage of the current economic crisis to provide actual financial solutions?
Yeah, I think some of it comes down to just simple messaging, and that's probably where that's where like I see my fit in this space, is trying to help the average person to go from I'm not quite sure what that is to wait a sec, he just described things that I'm familiar with and he related them to things that are happening in DeFi. So yeah, I think that I think one of the most important things is communication, and that also means localizing language. Like that means that one of the things that DeFi and Bitcoin or in Ethereum, well, DeFi being a subsection of Ethereum in general, and then also Bitcoin, it's very important to translate all of this into different languages. So I have talked to a number of folks recently who have just reached out and said, hey, like, I really like the tutorials you're doing. I'd love to start doing them in my native language. And I'm like sitting here like, heck yeah, man, do it. I'll help you. I can help coach you if you need it, just because to me, we all sort of win together if people are creating their own audience and going out and, again, localizing what DeFi opportunities there are, and again, trying to communicate that to folks that they have more in common with. I think use cases are really important, that we keep them simple too. So it goes back to what language, and then just keeping it simple. A lot of these applications, I don't want to talk to the average person about put options and say, oh yeah, let's talk about options trading in DeFi. That's ridiculous. So one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin has always been the simplicity of the fact that it is digital gold, and then you can transfer it globally anywhere. And whether or not it ever turns into digital cash doesn't really matter. It's kind of been like a narrative that's fallen to the wayside, and whatever. They have a really narrow, simple sort of story to share. Ethereum is it's like a pizza with endless toppings. And so the toppings that interest me the most on the Ethereum pizza are, I love wallets, because at the end of the day, you can't do anything unless you know how to store your wealth. And if someone even recognizes that having a censorship-resistant store of value is worth having, that's a huge win. Beyond that, I think that earning interest is very, very important to expose people to, and that goes hand in hand with stable coins then, because anyone can then, I think about Mariano Conti from MakerDAO, who's based in Buenos Aires. He talks about the fact that he has exposure to the US dollar, he can get paid in DAI, and then he's able to circumvent the awful inflation there. So that stable coins can be very powerful for someone. But then on top of it, if you can take those stable coins, lend them, because you're lending to people who have over collateralized loans. They're not under collateralized. And you have a system that says, hey, if you don't pay this back, and if you show irresponsibility in maintaining your loan, the DeFi application or smart contracts will liquidate it. I feel more comfortable lending to a DeFi app than I do to a bank at this point. The major difference, of course, is that there is never a concern of a smart contract bug, with a bank. So what we've covered: wallets, which is a store of value, a transfer of value. We've got stable coins. We've got the ability to earn interest. Hand in hand with that is taking out a loan. I don't think of over-collateralized loans as resonating with people who urgently need access to censorship-resistant peer-to-peer finance. I mean, I've tried to explain it to folks, and they're like, hold on, why would I take a loan when I have more money than the loan I'm taking? And then that goes back to, well, if you're speculating on the value of the asset going up in price, you can take a loan against it, and that's why you would do it. I would say something that doesn't get enough appreciation is it's really the liquidity now in DeFi. So liquidity has grown that much more, and you have the ability to get the best prices and the least amount of slippage. And slippage means if I want to buy something for a price, I get it at that price. Slippage could mean that maybe it goes up or down 1% as I'm trying to buy or sell something. And so that the fact that there are applications now on Ethereum where if you want to trade and you say, hey, I'd like to use my DAI to buy Ether, you use the DEX aggregator and it pulls from all this different liquidity. It's essentially like a search engine. It's like Google, but for liquidity, and it looks for the best price and the least amount of slippage. I mean, these are really powerful tools. And it's like, we haven't even talked about things like Pull Together, which is like, a no loss lottery, and other sorts of like interesting applications. But once someone wraps their head around that, all those different use cases, to me, if someone gets to that point, it's hard to look back. You can't unsee what you've seen. It's hard for you to forget that there's this alternative finance system where no one can take your money and it pays you better returns. But by the way, it's early days, and it's going to require that I be very, very knowledgeable and careful about how I handle that money so that I don't lose it. I don't lose my private key or my wallet or something that would cause me to lose access to my wealth.
Well, that's very important, since we already covered the fact that you will have nightmares if that happens. So
I will. If anyone ever has feedback on it too, let me know if you think there's risks I'm not covering. I really, it is my absolute worst nightmare.
I only have 2 final questions for you. First off, I want to know, in your opinion, since you started by saying You are inclining a little bit towards Bitcoin right now. I want to ask you a Bitcoin related question. Why you're feeling a little bit more Bitcoinish?
I think when I think about a global audience outside of the United States, especially, it's just so hard to ignore the success that Bitcoin has had, the brand recognition. Like, I know, to me, Bitcoin is like a gateway drug into the crypto space. And I would say like that gateway ends for me at Ethereum. I really don't have any interest beyond Ethereum and Bitcoin. I am very bored. I say it all the time, I'm very bored by Bitcoin. And that's thankfully kind of led me to exploring more DeFi applications and thinking about like, wow, like this is what I thought crypto was going to be about, building like this whole alternative finance system. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, to keep it simple, like I view them as apples and oranges. I think that Ether, the native token of Ethereum, is extremely undervalued. That's not financial advice. No one should go buy Ether because of me. But I think for everything that is built on the Ethereum highway, it's a lot of complexity to still be priced into Ether. It's difficult for the average person to wrap their mind around everything going on in Ethereum. But with Bitcoin, you're like, oh, you mean that thing that's been on TV, that thing that people generally know the name of, that thing that has a very narrow specific use case. So like Bitcoin has always had incredible marketing unintentionally behind it. And so that's why my heart is more in DeFi. I don't think that Bitcoin doesn't need me. It has an outrageous, community.
It has its own cheerleaders, yes.
Right, that's right. And to be honest, I can't cheerlead stacking sats at all costs. Again, I feel, sometimes I admire those who are able to continue to say that, but like, I just don't believe that that's responsible to buy at all costs, to buy, no matter what. But I got to say, it's worked out for quite a few of them. Like dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin over time has worked out for a lot of people. Similarly, it's also worked out very well for those who have dollar cost average into Ether. But I think that when you look at the market caps, there's a clear difference. I think like Ethereum is maybe like 1/8 of Bitcoin. It's 1/8 of Bitcoin, but we could talk for the next week about all the applications. I couldn't even show you all the applications that I'm using on Ethereum. And so you sit there and you say, how is it possible that, is it possible that I just know something and a few, many others know something about Ethereum's value and the rest of the world doesn't yet? Or are we crazy? Are we in our own little bubble? And I've really critically thought about that and tried to be open-minded to like looking at the evidence around me. And I'm like, yeah, there's no doubt. I am lucky. I have definitely discovered a secret that Ethereum is providing this alternative finance system. And when I show those applications and people see that you can save time, you save money, and you ultimately gain the ability to do things with money you couldn't previously do, it's very difficult for people to unsee that value. Versus what I do with Bitcoin, which is it's a rock that I put into a wallet, and I'm grateful for that rock. It's a very valuable rock, but I keep that rock safe.
Hey, you're already entering into Joe Mama's fat kind of circle. So let's stay out of there.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the difference? Like, I mean, is your heart normally more in Bitcoin? Like, do you see more of the value there? Like, I'm always curious to learn from others what they're seeing.
I am not into crypto. That's how I
do a great job reporting on it. That's amazing.
I'm reporting on it. Go
I love
figure.
it.
Yeah, that's how I stay objective. You actually got into a subject that it interested me. I know that I promised only 2 more questions, but actually you bring up another one.
I can talk to you all day. This is really fun. Yeah, please keep going. Yeah.
You well said that, well, Bitcoin and blockchain itself has a very strict financial use. It's very,
Yeah.
very it's just it just is what it is. It's money. Okay, it's good.
Right.
And Ethereum, rather than just a cryptocurrency, has always relied its value, its real value, on its capacity to serve as an infrastructure to create other products and services. So
Yeah.
I would like to know, how is DeFi impacting, or how could impact on the Ethereum market? Could
Yeah.
usability, yeah, impact in against this bigger market that, as you will said, has cheerleaders?
Yeah. I sit on a side of this debate where I clearly believe that, again, that Ether, the native token, is undervalued, and that the highway that is Ethereum, that all these applications are built on, while ETH is still the premier collateral that powers most of them, that's an argument for why it's so undervalued. You also have proof of stake, which we're think of it this way: Ethereum 2 is like trying to, again, like, keep it simple. Ethereum 2 is like, I live in a house in a neighborhood, and that is Ethereum 1. And there have been lots of upgrades to it, but at the end of the day, I want to move into a better, nicer neighborhood. And Ethereum 2 is a neighborhood down the street that's been built, and it's a whole new community, and it's better. And just everything's going to run that much better. However, at some point, I'm not just going to move from Ethereum 1 neighborhood to 2. We're going to literally pick up my house and we're going to drop it into the Ethereum 2 neighborhood. That's basically it. They've been rebuilding a better machine. And then a part of that machine will actually be what is today is the infrastructure of Ethereum 1. And so when we do that, a part of securing that network, proof of stake, requires that people deposit Ether, and which is referred to as staking. If you can imagine, one of the simplest narratives for people to see value, and part of the reason like Bitcoin has had such a feverish audience behind it, is the limited supply and the fact that folks know what that limited supply is. Well, with Ethereum, you're talking about all these folks locking up Ether. So now you have less Ether available. On top of it, the issuance rate eventually drops to less than 1%. And so you have two different approaches now. You have Bitcoin, which has a limited supply, and it's very easy for someone to understand that that token is valuable if you perceive it to be valuable with this limited supply. Ether, on the other hand, has a continued issuance of less than 1%, because the idea is that you need that Ether to incentivize people to continue to stake in the network, to be able to provide a security for this network. And so it's two different approaches. And, you know, you and I will probably be at the end of our lifetimes before it's clear which one was the right approach. But yeah, I'm proud of, I think, what Ethereum has researched and stood for in trying this different approach. And I'm excited because obviously with Ethereum too, like, we're talking about transactions moving faster and being able to build even better money applications and getting away from some of the latency that we deal with proof of work. So yeah, anyways, there's that part of the equation that hasn't even been figured in for Ethereum. It's hard to know, like, when do enough people know about this and understand this complexity on top of all the complexity of the applications? Like, when does that all get priced in? And then there's also there's one last part of the equation, a third part of it, that there are efforts to enable a mechanism where you would actually burn Ethereum in every transaction. So now you have limited issuance, you have people staking a large supply of that Ether, or it's being locked up to secure the network. And now you also have Ether that is being burned in every transaction, or essentially it's decreasing the supply. So all these sorts of things are feeding really understandable narratives to what makes a token valuable. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, we'll find out in the coming years here, but like, yeah, I'm much more, I would say, my long-term investments at this point go into Ether, even though I do have I have an allocation of my portfolio in Bitcoin. I see them as apples and oranges, but I feel like the upside here, the real like exciting, innovative future to me is what's in Ethereum and namely DeFi.
Yeah, well, I saw it coming. I'm very glad that you almost did, but you didn't fall into the cliche of we are almost there. So
Yeah.
you save it for a little bit. No, but that's a really interesting view. I was asking you that in correlation to the question, how could this ecosystem of services and products could actually take an advantage in the current crisis? Because right now we're seeing, for example, that in Latin America we're going to start seeing a very hard punches towards especially remittances, for example. Like in Mexico, that's going to happen, and it's already happening. Also for Argentina, Venezuela, you name it. So
Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting to see if the services that are being developed on top of Ethereum actually have a shot at conquering spaces where traditional institutions are going to be way too over their heads to cover for those users.
Are you saying, Diana? You're saying that you see the opportunity then, right? Like it's a good thing, not a taking advantage of. It's the fact that I think of it as like there's an urgency when you have gotten to the point where you cannot trust the authorities that are supposed to protect your wealth and preserve laws that are supposed to like keep your money safe in a bank. Suddenly you say, why am I in this system? I'm going to opt out. And that's what, to me, like that's what DeFi is opting out. You can opt out completely, all banking services versus just a store of value with Bitcoin.
Well, you see, that's another perspective. The perspective that I know, since you got so impressed that I told you that I'm not into crypto, is that these are tools. My way of thinking is the financial services are going to be over their heads. The central banks are already talking about how they're going to start printing more money so they can fill for a need. The economy as we know it, it's going to suffer a big hit. It's already suffering so much. So
yeah.
The way of thinking is, if they can't provide for the solutions and they cannot provide for the liquidity needed, there's more liquidity in the internet in these services. So that's the interesting thing that I see that maybe we'll get to see develop in further years. I obviously don't think that these services, I don't think that these services that are only 2 years old are going to start falling for the need of millions of people. But it will be interesting to see how this crisis actually impose more people into looking for solutions that might or might not be built on Ethereum. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, and that's where the opportunity then is. It's in education. Like I don't want it to be, oh, there's a DeFiDad, there's the Defiant, there's all the work you do, there's Bankless. I want there to be hundreds of people that are doing that. Like I want there to be photocopies of me in other languages. There's just so much. There's so much room for all of us to succeed, and it means helping one another. At the end of the day, it doesn't mean telling people at all costs to buy Ether, telling people at all costs to buy Bitcoin. It's about helping people to understand, here's where you're coming from. Here's a solution that can potentially lead you to a better way of living. And that, to me, that's why, like, DeFi to me, I don't think about the person who lives in New York City who complains about their bank. I think about Mariano. I think about Patricio, who's also based there from Proof of Attendance Protocol. I think about Friends, where it's like there's no other alternative, because those are communities that have been marginalized and actually need a better way. It could be a matter of life and death. No one deserves to lose their life savings overnight because of inflation or because of some like corrupt, out of control dictatorship and authoritarian. And that's a much bigger problem across the world than.
It happens. I have heard it happens.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, then I will have just one more question for you. If Bitcoin is imposed, it has the major attraction during crisis time.
Yes, yeah.
What is the impulse for DeFi?
Good point. Yeah, I feel like both have had days where we've said, what's going on? I thought this is what we were waiting for. Like we were waiting for like, not hoping for it, but this sort of like societal collapse with the pandemic seems to sort of play to the strengths of both. So what I've seen since I remember March, I started thinking like, wow, like this is way more serious than any of us like really thought. Unfortunately, when markets collapse, especially like the most liquid global markets, everything tends to collapse with it, and that means even Bitcoin and Ether have both been uncorrelated with the stock markets. You think about like the S&P 500, and they've continued to remain mostly uncorrelated. Every so often it moves up a little bit to like 0.2, which means that they're moving more in unison with the stock market or moving down in unison. And I think like what we're hoping to see over the coming months, and because it takes time again for all this to get priced into the markets, is to see, I think everyone wants to see the crypto markets, which are mostly correlated, the Bitcoin and Ether move together up or down. We're hoping to see them uncouple completely. I mean, we'd love to see, crypto, of course, go up when things go down. But right now, this most global stocks, I'm not rooting against them, but most global stocks have recovered quite a bit. And so I think for Ethereum, going back to like, what is the opportunity then for Ethereum? I think the opportunity won't be achieved unless there is mass education. That's why like I spend all this time trying to create like videos where I'm going to create videos about the same concepts of lending and borrowing over and over again, because my assumption is most people won't see it. Few will pay attention. But at some point, if I catch just one person, that's one more person that's like, holy cow, the light bulb has gone off, and this is an alternative finance system I want to participate in. So I think the opportunity, like I've been seeing it work. I mean, when you look at the growth in the DeFi markets, one of the great ways to measure that, even though there's some criticism about this, is total value locked in smart contracts. How much money has been deposited in aggregate into all of these different DeFi applications? And if you ignore the US dollar price, because that's can go up and down, if you just focus on Ether that's being deposited, it's gone up a lot. I think like looking today, in the last 90 days, it's gone up from 2.8 million to 3.15 million Ether. And then if you look at it, even in the last year, we're up from 1.75 million up to 3 million. So almost like doubled. It's a good indicator of the fact that people are willing to trust their transferable wealth in DeFi applications, and they're trying to put their money to work. We need continued net growth, though. It doesn't matter unless we continue to find more folks who are saying that is a good idea, and I'm going to participate in this peer-to-peer, finance network on Ethereum. So we've been seeing people tokenize Bitcoin because in DeFi, when you take that value and now you can take out loans against it, or you can be a market maker, that's a really good sign that folks that are in this system are realizing, hey, the DeFi thing is onto something, and I want to participate in that. There's $108.72 million in Bitcoin that's been tokenized on Ethereum. And then also total wallets continues to grow on Ethereum. That's a good and a bad metric. It's good because it does indicate that there's more unique users, but at the same time, DeFiDad could have 5 different wallets and keep creating them, so it could be a false metric. But anyways, hopefully that's my wishy-washy answer to the opportunity for DeFi.
Well, then we can close with that thought in mind. DeFiDad has a lot of wallets.
Yeah, each one. I put $1. I only put $1 into it, and then I create a new wallet just in case, mitigate the risk of losing my wallet.
But that's not financial advice for anyone to put $1 in each wallet.
No, you should. No, that is financial advice. You should not put $1 into a wallet and then put it into.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. Actually, it was a blast, and we learned so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. This is so much fun, and like I'm happy now. Now I know of like one more talented person like reporting and helping educate people. It's really important. I appreciate what you're doing. And
well, thank you again. See you soon.
Thanks, Diana.
Yes, and also I have a very important question that I bet that a lot of your fans in YouTube are asking themselves.
I have fans?
I don't
Holy
know.
cow. This is breaking news. I didn't know that. But
let's just say that you may have.
I got maybe one. It's like my mom. She just keeps clicking subscribe and creating new Gmails. And she's, look, honey, you got 2,000 subscribers. Mom, it says your name in all of the YouTube handles.
Well, your mother is amazing. So no, actually, just a little joke before we proceed. But actually, because you have already said you're a dad and you have 2 kids, which one is the one that appears in your photo?
Oh, that's that's my son. I've had a number of people say things like, oh, your daughter's cute. And I'm like, that's actually a little boy.
And does he like Bitcoin?
It's funny, I've tried to get him to say the word Ethereum and Bitcoin. What's interesting is a few months ago, or maybe it was even like a year ago, it was probably a year ago, because I remember like trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to post tutorials. This makes sense to me because I'm using lots of DeFi apps. But then I was also thinking about like, how do I create like an audience? Do I just post these tutorials and eventually people will catch on to it? I do remember thinking about like, maybe if I got my kids to say really cute words that are crypto related, it would go viral. But then the privacy oriented part of me was like, absolutely not. That's insane. Like, I'm not going to I don't want to put my kids on video. So that's the one shot of my kids that I ever really share. Everything else, I feel like there's something wrong about sharing photos of them when they're so little, and like we're kind of growing up in this weird surveillance world of everyone sharing too many pictures and information about themselves. So yeah, anyways, that was all the thinking that went into it. So I eventually just abandoned it. Was like, the profile picture is good enough. That's enough.
Well, then we know that you're not a marketer kind of person, which
yeah.
which will be nice to know to your fans and your mom.